Hola, ¿qué tal? Bienvenidos a otra emisión de Learning Never Stops. Hoy tenemos un invitado de lujo. Tenemos a nada más y nada menos que el doctor Stéphan Vincent-Lancrin, que es el director del Centro de Investigación e Innovación Educativa y además un analista senior de la OCDE. Y pues me gustaría darle la bienvenida. We are going to switch to English now, and please welcome Dr. Stéphan Vincent-Lancrin. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
Doctor, so can you start by telling a little about you, your interest, how is it that you find yourself researching and speaking about education, technology, creativity, and critical thinking?
So I've been working at the OECD and in the OECD Center for Education Research and Innovation, and I would say there are, two big challenges that we've had in the past 2 years. One is really related to the digital transformation, and which takes two different aspects. One is what should we actually learn in the future? What should the education try to foster? And that's really why we've been doing this work on creativity and critical thinking. But I'm also in charge of the work on how to actually adopt technology as part of education. And so we have a work which is called Smart Data and Digital Education, Digital Technology in Education, which produces a digital education outlook at the OECD and which looks at how to actually use the most advanced technologies for teaching and learning on the one hand, and also to support system and institutional management on the other hand. And obviously the COVID has made all this very much topical, even more than it used to be when we started the project.
Thank you. I see. So let's dive into the subject of digitalization in education. There has been a lot of projects in the world that has aimed to insert new technology, digital technology, into education, and there seems to be this feeling that every time there's like a lot of hope, and then some feeling that is not happening what expected. It's like we have a lot of expectation on digitalization in education. What would you say that's happening there?
Well, I think that there is always a risk that we have in one more of these waves. However, there is something which is slightly different, and there are perhaps two things which are slightly different. One is that we experienced COVID, and that most of the teachers and learners and families have actually seen that technology can actually make a difference to teaching and learning. In some cases, they hated it, but everyone has tried it, and they also have experienced what the potential of it is. And I would say the second thing is that it has led to the realization among governments of how actually it can be an enabler for many of the things that we have been trying to solve in education. And last but not least, all the discussion we had with ChatGPT has made it visible and palpable to everyone that there is a digital transformation happening in society, and that it's not just people talking and having these kind of big titles on the magazines, but everyone can see it for themselves, that what is happening is really amazing.
Yeah, I think that's between COVID and now AI, it seems like the challenges are adding up faster that we can respond to them in terms of systems, but we have to be agile enough to try new things. And that's some sort of a challenge that we see a lot when we talk to schools and universities. There are systems that are designed to be really strict because of what is in stake, of what means to go forward inside those systems. And there seems to be little room for improvement or innovation at the fast space. How do you? What's a way that we can try to input some innovation and space for trying new things in these kind of systems?
Well, I think that the first thing, and I'm going back to COVID, I mean, education systems, to a lesser extent higher education, but have been seen as resistant to change, resistant to innovation. But look at what happened during COVID. When they were forced, how much energy innovation they've put in place so that learning would continue. And so the big question is, how can we continue in that spirit? Not everything was great, but how can we continue to unleash that kind of energy? So one of the difficulties and that we face with technology, and that we tend to underestimate. Usually we talk a lot about technology, what it can do, what are the opportunities, but what we don't talk about is more how the old technologies have been negotiated with people, and so the question of the social acceptance of different things. So when you're talking about, the things which are a bit restricted, it is because, for example, we have this idea that a fair exam has to be this way, and that promotion has to be based on these and these criteria. But it's not something as natural as we believe. This is something that have been constructed over time that we accept as being the rules of the game. The big question is, can we change some of these rules? Because they may or they may not make sense.
I see. So we have to rethink the rules.
To some extent, So, for example, if you think of, the eruption of generative AI, and the first thing that people were very concerned about is, that it will allow people to cheat, so that it will no longer be fair, etc. Another way to think about it is that it's going to accelerate the learning of people, because in fact, in a reduced amount of time, they will be able to do so much more than what they can do before, because they will have some help that they didn't have in the past. And, they will need critical thinking, they will need creativity to, get to the next steps, and they will be able to design stuff that they didn't have time to do before, And so why not take advantage of these tools to actually change, the way that we assess and that we test people. Let me give you another example. We have now, thanks to all the data that we are collecting in education systems, we have progressions. We can. Why do we want to limit ourselves to how students are doing on day X on this particular test? When perhaps, we could imagine new rules that would be fair if they're negotiated socially and if people agree with them, and, so that, there are different ways of thinking. And what I believe, the COVID has shown is that the status quo is not the only possible way forward.
Yeah. So what I we have been discussing a lot also with our with some of these institutions is where to start if there's, because it seems to be like two ways to do this, or two parts to start. And you have talked in other places about this. The elements that companies value new employees, and seems to be like creativity and critical thinking be on the top, and sometimes on or clearly above the hard knowledge. So it seems like companies' employment seems to have that very clear. But then if you move to higher education, it seems to be like an important thing, but it's not like being measured. And then if you go back, it seems like you can talk to K-12 systems into inserting creativity and critical thinking. But what they eventually say is, I can do this, but at the same time, I have to be sure that my students go to the next level. And by that, they have to pass the test. And the test is about math and language. And, so where to break the the cycle?
So I think that you're absolutely right. And it is interesting because, the project that we have at the OECD on creativity and critical thinking, we've been working for 5 years on primary and secondary education, and now we are working on higher education. And the reason why we do it is exactly because of what you just said, that in fact, it doesn't make any sense to try to promote creativity and critical thinking as a factor of change in primary and secondary if you don't do the same in higher education, and if higher education institutions do not value it. Because what is happening, especially at the secondary education level, is that the teachers feel like we don't want to fail our students, because in fact, if it is not what is expected from the higher education institution, then it cannot happen. So you're absolutely right that there is some level of alignment that has to be created, and that higher education institutions have to change their ways of admitting students. In countries where they have a university entrance exam, they have to change that so that they can actually also value, things like creativity and critical thinking. And for that, we're trying to develop examples of what it looks like, to do traditional exams where you can actually develop that, or as we've mentioned, the development of a standardized test as well, that could actually help to do that. But that's one of the difficulties. So it is interesting because, when we talk to colleagues who work in primary and secondary education, they say, oh, it's very difficult for us to do because exactly what you said, then we'll have difficulties for students to do it in higher education. But ironically, when you talk with higher education colleagues, what they tell you is that, it's very difficult for us to do that because the primary and secondary education systems have given our students a false idea of what good teaching is. And so if we don't teach in the format that they have been having for the past 12, 13 years, then they are lost, they feel that it's not good education, etc. So the big question is, how do we change a little bit the format of education? And for that, it's not a revolution that we need, we need an evolution only, and so we need to continue to value the knowledge in the different disciplines, the kind of technical knowledge, but we have to make room for creativity, for critical thinking. Critical thinking is actually much more common in education systems. Most people in higher education will tell you that that's what they're doing. But then when you ask them to show you what they're doing to develop it, then that's when it becomes a bit trickier. Because the idea is that if you get high-level knowledge in a domain, then automatically you will have critical thinking. But it's not true, It's
No.
That's part of the problems of the system. It's always somebody else's business, so that the philosophy teacher will do it, the arts teacher will do the creativity, but it's never my problem, because I don't have time for that. And so that's really what we need to try to change. And for that, let's be fair, I don't believe that teachers are to blame, or even that the populations are to blame, because most of the time they agree that it is very important and that it's more enjoyable as well, So the question for them is really, how can we support them to do it? How can we give them the space? And how can we make it not a very long extra workload? So, the way that we've been thinking about it at the OECD was to think that, yes, it takes time to change, but we need to give examples, we need to give tools, and hopefully in a few years' time, it will not take you more time, because that will be just a second way of thinking about, how to teach and how to learn, and that will become a routine that will become accepted.
You have mentioned one key element on all these, and these teachers. We, as a company, we work a lot on professional development, and we see that there's a very scarce resource, and scarcer is scarcer than money, which is teachers' time. They usually have very little time to be used into professional development. We are asking them basically to stop doing what they were doing for the last 20 years and start doing things differently. How do you approach that? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that indeed, in our studies, time is always mentioned as the biggest impediment to, changing things. So there are two different ways, or several different ways of thinking about it. One, for example, in the case of primary and secondary education, is to think differently about the curricula. The curricula are overcrowded, and so one of the things that we've been arguing is to do less but better. We don't need to learn all these different things, but if we can learn things which are more relevant to the students and which are better, then they learn that, in fact, they could learn anything, that they have the capacity to do that. And so we have to be a bit less focused about content. The second thing is that we need to support and value the time that the teachers do initially to do that, So we have to provide them with professional development, give them some specific time to develop, this new skill that we want them to have, and to value it, because if we don't value what they're doing, it's not happening. And then, it's the prime of change, when we start doing things for the first time, it takes more time. And then, when you try to do a new recipe, then, you need to have your recipe book, you want to do things very carefully, etc. And then after a while, when you know the recipe very well, then you just look at what is in your pot and then you say whether it's going right or wrong, and you don't need to have all the scaffolding anymore. So, and then it doesn't take time, So that's really where we should try to be going.
Yeah. So just to summarize quickly, so reducing curriculum is doing less but better, like taking out things instead of trying to put more things in content and curricula, and appreciating more the time and the value of that teachers provide to the systems, and letting them try and iterate, right? So I would like to go to a next question, which is very popular right now. It's the artificial intelligence and how can it impact the whole education landscape. When I hear the actors in the education, in the artificial intelligence scene, like the creator of ChatGPT, the CEO of OpenAI, or the CEO of Microsoft, talking about artificial intelligence, they keep mentioning education as one of the main human areas that will be impacted. So what do you think what's the impact that it may have in the next years?
Well, let me first say that, for our audience, that AI is not just generative AI. There are a lot of other forms of AI in education that perhaps actually can be even less visible, perhaps, but can be even more powerful than generative AI in improving our education systems. So, for example, you have adaptive learning and intelligent tutoring systems, which help people to learn at their own pace, learn at home, etc. And that can actually create also some much more specialized and targeted improvement in people's learning. You have early warning systems, for example, which can help to identify those students who are at risk of dropping out, and which can help us to actually keep people in school and to design intervention that will help them to stay on board, and reduce the level of inequity in our education systems. And, I could mention a few other applications. Now, of course, generative AI is quite an interesting domain as well, and it's going to change things. I think that, there is a lot, for example, of the system I have mentioned, like intelligent tutoring systems, which remain much more specialized than generative AI. Generative AI is it's a general purpose technology. It's not designed for education. It can be used in education, but it's not designed for that. But it can change education in different ways. It can support teachers to design some of their lesson plans. It can help the students to develop some of their answers and learn from the answers that were actually developed by the generative AI. it can actually help students to go much faster than they used to and do things which are much more difficult than what they were able to do before, because they didn't have the time or the support to actually do all these things. And so to get to something which is much closer to what a real professional is doing in their field. When I'm saying a professional, I mean a teacher, some creative artist, a coder if you're in informatics, etc. So that and so it can actually really support the kind of transformation towards more active learning that we were talking about. Because what it shows is that just knowing facts and structuring things is not enough anymore, because there will be a lot of help from computers to do that. But people still have to be able to correct, understand what the computers are doing, so that perhaps it's not going to change so much the skill that we need to learn, but it will really help us to apply them much more effectively in the different domains and much more deeply, I would say. And that's one of the big revolution that I see. Then it will affect education sectors in a lot of different ways. For example, think of the field of assessment, for example. Well, it can actually support the generation of much more items than what we had in the past, at a much faster pace. We can have more complex assessment than what we had in the past with generative AI, but also with AI in general. It's quite an expensive technology, but when you can see that this kind of breakthrough are happening, it shows that the automatic scoring of essays, for example, in a reliable way, or the fact to be able to assess innovative skills or complex skills thanks to the use of simulations, games, feedback given to chatbots, etc. People being scaffolded as they learn and being assessed at the same time is becoming a reality. Or let's say it's much closer to reality. What prevented it from happening before was the fact that it was so expensive.
Yes, so we have this sort of openness and access to this new technology, this generative technology that's making so many news today, and that makes it the scenario very different. So we are heading to the last part of the program, and I would like to ask you three questions. We have talked about several subjects here that are in the realm of digital transformation, how digital tools can improve or modify in a better way the educational experience. And there are typically three actors in this. There are more, but we like to think of students, faculty or teachers, and leaders or decision makers. I would like to have you send a message to each one of these groups in terms of how to move forward and why maybe we have this urgency to move forward in terms to improve education.
Yeah, so to the students, I would like to say that learning matters for the future, and also that learning is exciting. Sometimes students have this idea that learning is boring because it's about remembering facts, and then it's about not passing and taking an exam and perhaps not passing it and having a score, a grade. That's not what learning is about. And learning is very exciting. It matters, and it's about doing things that you haven't done before, and that is exciting. And so I think that's really the new mindset that the students should have, not when they're asked about how school was this week, then not telling the parents how much they got in terms of grades, but what are the exciting new things that they have learned. To the teachers, I would like to say, learning never stops. And I believe that's really, we have to continue to learn And innovation is actually a way of learning. That's the important aspect of it. When you try to do new things, you're learning because you're out of your comfort zone, and you have to experience it to be actually good at conveying it to your own students. So you have to be creative, you have to be a critical thinker, and you have to convey the knowledge as part of that. It is and for that you have to step back, you have to be intentional, but you have to be willing to continue to learn with your peers and for the benefit of your students. And I would say that to the policymakers and to the institutional leaders, that your role is to support learning, the learning of the teachers and the learning of the students. And for that, you have to give them these opportunities to learn. And for example, by giving them access to digital tools, by making sure that their time is not wasted with trying to select tools, for example, etc., but providing them the right environment, providing them professional learning opportunities, the right tools for that in case of the teachers, and making sure that you create this climate of, which is an innovation-friendly climate where people can actually try things, fail, succeed, and that can be actually valued over time. And for that, to make sure that the goals of quality of education, of equity, and also to some extent of efficiency are things that are a reality. That's really in their hands. And usually speaking, it's not through a punitive approach or what is thing like that you can actually do that, but it's more by supporting people and making sure that they do things that they like and that they're good at, and where they can actually stretch a little bit. So it shouldn't be too challenging, but bringing in some challenges from time to time is one way to actually go forward.
Dr. Stéphan Vincent-Lancrin, it's been a delightful conversation about these subjects, these matters that are very important for all of us. Thank you very much for your time and your thoughts today.
Thank you very much. Thanks to you.